Welcome to another Tuesday workshop. We are again live on Facebook. Hello, Facebook. Today we are going to talk about a disorder that's actually very dear to my heart. Not for enjoyment, but for necessity. And we're going to talk about diabetes. And diabetes is one of the top 3 or 4 disorders in the world that is unfortunately killing a lot of people. And why do you think, so let's just briefly go over some of the things that people are dealing with. The top 3 things that most people are suffering from is what? What do you think number 1 is?
Cancer.
Hypertension, or we could call it heart disease.
Yes.
So heart disease is number 1. Number 2, you said it, is cancer. And number 3 or 4, I'm not sure what it is diabetes. So it's up there. We call it an epidemic. Literally, because there's millions and millions of people around the world that are dealing with this. So heart disease, cancer, and diabetes are unfortunately taking the lives of a lot of people in our life. Why do you think that it's so out of control?
The food.
So the food. So what about the food?
Everything has starches, sugar. You don't know what, you buy something, and you have to really read the labels.
Okay. What else here?
Actually, it's the lack of food.
Okay, lack of food. So we have an aspect of food and lack of food. Something you said is very important, and it's the words, we don't know. We don't know what's in our food. So we could use a different way of saying we don't know is a lack of understanding. So the reason why heart disease, cancer, diabetes, you could go into thyroid disorders, you go into every metabolic disorder. The reason why they are so epidemic in nature is because there is a huge misunderstanding or understanding of why people go through these disorders and how to correctly treat these disorders. So heart disease, number 1, people are looking at the wrong things when it comes to heart disease. I'm not going to go into a lot about heart disease, but a lot of doctors have taught that, in order to kind of evaluate if you're at a higher risk for heart disease, you got to look at high blood pressure, cholesterol, and all of those type of things, which is true. If you have a higher risk for heart disease, those things will be off. But there's other reasons why they would be off. But it's not being taught, and then it's obviously not being taught how to treat that. So today we're going to really more focus on diabetes, because I could go on hours about heart disease, and we could go on hours about cancer, and we could even go on hours about diabetes. I'm going to try to keep it within a half hour. I don't want to keep you guys too long. But diabetes, I said, is more dear to my heart because, as crazy as it sounds, about 1 year ago, I was personally diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which to me sounded absolutely crazy because I always thought I lived a generally healthy life. I tried to eat the foods that I was supposed to eat. I worked out regularly. So for me to get a diagnosis about a year ago with that type 1 diabetes, it was like a knock in the, in the gut. And it said to myself, if I'm supposedly living a healthy life, then how could my body become type 1 diabetic when I never had it before? So that started my wheels turning in my head, and I did so much research on diabetes, especially type 1, and what I'm going to share today, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't understand about type 1, and we're even going to go into the other aspects of diabetes like type 2, and there's a couple other ones that aren't even talked about. But for me, you know what the number 1 symptom that I had that made me check to see if I even had any metabolic problems? What do you think my major symptom was? Weight. Was I gaining or losing?
Losing.
I was losing weight. So about a year and a half ago, I started losing weight. And to me, I never lost weight in my life. I always just slowly gained, but a healthy weight. I had some muscle mass, so I gained a little bit of weight here and there. So I never lost weight. So to me, I just thought, last year I got married, could be a stressful time. I bought a house, could be a stressful time. I started working with a personal trainer, obviously could make you lose weight. So I lost, in a 3-month period, almost 20 pounds. So to me, as never losing weight before, getting a weight loss of 20 pounds had me starting to think. Starting me to say, all right, well, this to me does not sound right. So I went to the doctor and I was like, let me just see if my weight loss is safe. So I got an evaluation on my metabolic, panel. And to my surprise, I thought I was going to come back maybe with a thyroid issue. Because thyroid and metabolic, issues are very common, especially when you have weight loss or weight gain. So I thought it was going to come back with some thyroid issues. When the doctor called me the next day, 2 days later, whatever it was, and said, well, we found out why you're losing weight. And I was like, oh, why, what's up? Thinking I'm going to hear, oh, yeah, your thyroid's, higher functioning or low functioning. He goes, no, you have diabetes. I was like, diabetes? Like, that does not sound right to me in any way. So we got further evaluation, and at first they diagnosed me with type 2 diabetes. Now that definitely didn't make sense to me because type 2 diabetics typically have, not all the time, typically have more of a overweight look. They usually don't eat well in any way. And it just didn't have the body type and the lifestyle of a type 2 diabetic. So I did some further evaluation. I got a specialist to look at me, and when we ended up finding out that I was type 1 diabetic and I needed to get on insulin. My levels were so high that I had to get on insulin like immediately. So the normal level for glucose, you want to be under 100 when you're fasting. You would really like to be lower, but under 100 is normal fasting blood sugar, meaning when you're fasting for about 8 to 10 hours, you get a blood sugar test, you should be under 100, maybe even a little bit lower. 85 to 100 is a good number. So for me, when I got that evaluation, guess what my number was?
Twice that much?
263.
Almost 3 times.
Almost 3 times the amount. And when we got the hemoglobin A1C test, which is the evaluation over a 3-month period. So it's an average of a 3-month period. So that should be, I believe it's under 6 is a good number. My number was 12.9. So I knew right there my body was not in a good state. So I tried to go the more natural route. I tried to change my diet. I tried to do it without insulin and any medication. They first put me on a medication to lower my glucose level that they usually put for type 2 diabetics, which is called metformin. I was on that, and I started to take it for a day. My numbers started going higher. So we already knew that was something my body was not supposed to have. So I stopped taking that immediately. My numbers, by changing my diet to a more natural diet and having less carbohydrates, changed it slightly, but I was still in those 200 range. So I had to do something. So I had to get on insulin. So I did get on the insulin, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later with the insulin. There's 2 types of insulin that you could take. And I currently only take one of the 2. And we're going to talk about why in a short period of time. So yeah, so that's my story. So this is like my wheelhouse. Like I experience it, so I have a better understanding on how to teach it. There's some doctors out there that don't experience it. They read it in the book. They understand what's going on. They kind of follow what the normal recommendations are. But believe it or not, diabetics are not actually taught how to reverse their disorder. They're just taught how to manage their disorder. So you have high blood sugar. Let's get you on an insulin or a blood sugar lowering medication. That's not telling you how to fix anything. It's just telling you, well, you have this blood sugar that's high, so we have to manage that so it doesn't get too high, which is a great thing to do. You never want it to get too high, but it's not teaching you how to correct the problem that caused that in the first place. So today we're going to go over diabetes in a way that most people probably have never heard before. And I'm excited for that, but at the same time, I'm hoping to keep it in 25 minutes because there's a lot of information to share. So, first of all, what is diabetes? Let's not even go into the next slide. What is diabetes?
It's a metabolic disorder.
It's a metabolic disorder. It's in that category. But what actually is happening to people that have diabetes?
Sugar.
So it's not that they can't process sugar. It's that their blood sugar level is not being managed. So there's a few different reasons why that could occur.
Right.
So they have depends on which one. So the pancreas, you said the pancreas is not working. We're going to talk about it in a second. So it's a dysregulation of the blood sugar, meaning when the blood sugar should be low or normal, it's too high. So there's multiple types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is an issue with the pancreas. But what most people don't realize is it's an autoimmune disorder, meaning that the body is attacking itself and chose the pancreas to attack.
Oh, yeah, you type one.
But most doctors aren't teaching that. Most doctors are just saying, oh, your pancreas isn't secreting enough insulin, so now I've got to give you insulin. Well, why is my pancreas all of a sudden stopping to secrete insulin? So that's huge. But they're not being taught that. So you have to treat type 1 as an autoimmune disorder. Type 2 is typically a lifestyle driven, meaning you've had a dietary lifestyle and a lifestyle that was driving your blood sugar too high, and the insulin is not able to manage it to lower it down. Because what insulin is it's a hormone in our body that takes the sugar out of the blood, brings it to the cells so that your cells have energy. But if you aren't able to control that very well, your blood sugar is going to slowly rise. And even the testing aspect of diabetes is missing a huge aspect, and that's why people are missing their pre-diagnosis of diabetes. Because you don't go from one day having normal blood sugar to a week later having abnormal blood sugar. But the way that they test it is a little bit different, and I'm hoping we can get to that in a little bit about that. But so type 1 autoimmune, type 2 is typically lifestyle driven. We're going to go over a couple other ones in a moment. So, quick statistics. Don't want to concentrate on this too much, but we have 347 million worldwide and 24 million in the United States dealing with diabetes. Most of them are type 2, but type 1 is becoming more and more apparent than you think. And it's the 7th leading cause of death. So I said 3 or 4 last time, but it's the 7th leading cause of death. And what most people don't realize is diabetes is a precursor or can give you an increased risk for heart disease and stroke for what it does to the arteries and stuff like that. So pretty scary. So it's a dysregulation of your blood sugar, which we just spoke about. So I already talked about type 1 and type 2. Type 1, autoimmune disorder, where the pancreas isn't secreting enough insulin. Your body needs external insulin to help to manage that. Type 2 is more lifestyle driven. It is your blood sugar is your blood sugar is rising too quickly for the amount of insulin that needs to take it out, and the sensitivity to insulin is not very well. Then you have 2 more, what's called LADA and MODI, which we're going to talk about in one moment. But like we said a moment ago, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune, 10% of the population, and you have to get treated from insulin to do that. So now let's talk about insulin, because we just talked about a moment ago how there's 2 types. So there's 2 types of insulin that are taken. One is called a long-lasting or long-standing insulin, where you take it in the morning or at night, and it's a 24-hour dose for the day. And it gets secreted slowly throughout the day. So it kind of gives you, it could be an injection, yeah, or it could be orally, but usually an injection. So that one usually take, like I said, in the morning or at night, and it's a 24-hour dose to kind of give you that baseline level. They call it basal insulin, a baseline level of a normal level, because obviously if you don't have enough insulin in your body to bring the level down, you could start your day off at, say, a level of 150, 200, as you saw for me, I was at 260s. So you want to have enough insulin that keeps that low. That's what's called a long-lasting insulin. Then there's the short-lasting one, or the short one, which is the ones you take at every meal. That's something that happens immediately. So you usually take that to counter the carbohydrates you're about to take in. So that's the big part of type 1 diabetes that is being confused. Because if you have diabetes, you're having a sensitivity to carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates rises your blood sugar the most out of any other macronutrient. Protein does rise your blood sugar, but not as quickly and not as much. Fat rarely raises your blood sugar. So having a diet that's higher in carbohydrates, which if you think about the all-American diet, is pretty high in carbohydrates. So now you have a diabetic who isn't supposed to have carbohydrates, whether they're type 1 or type 2. They're not supposed to have carbohydrates. But now they're being taught, just take the insulin or take the metformin or whatever drug, and it'll counter the carbohydrates that they're taking. Now they're living a lifestyle where they're just using the medicine to manage the disorder, and they're still having the problem of their blood sugar is fluctuating up and down. So what the ideal thing to do is to do a lower carbohydrate diet. When I spoke about last week, or was it 2 weeks ago, I talked about how I'm on a ketogenic diet. It's a very low carbohydrate diet. And for me, I'm very different compared to other type 1 diabetics because I'm only taking the long-lasting insulin. I do not take the insulin throughout the day. Why do you think that?
No carbohydrates.
I'm having a very low carbohydrate diet. So if I take the insulin, yet I'm not driving the glucose level up, it actually could be dangerous for me because then it would bring my blood sugar too low. Because there is obviously a problem of getting too low with glucose. You never want to get too low. So there's a good level you want to have. So I take enough insulin at night, which is a very low dose. I mean, I believe my units I take anywhere from 8 to 10 units, where I've heard some other diabetics that I know that are taking 30, 40 units at night. And then with their meal, they're taking, 5, 10, 15 units, depending on how many carbohydrates they're having. So the lifestyle really needs to change, and it's really a lower carbohydrate diet. And that's why, for me, I even had my endocrinologist that was confused on why I wasn't taking insulin throughout the day. Because he didn't get it, because he always was teaching his patients, like, just carb count and take the allotted dose for how many carbs you're supposed to take in. Well, for me, I was not going to live a lifestyle where I have to freaking count my carbs, figure out, okay, I'm having 30 carbs this meal, that's 2 doses, let me inject. Like, I was not about to live that life. Like, I'm all about being healthy and natural, so I did all that I can to figure out how to do this with as little insulin as possible. And number one is getting on a low carbohydrate diet. The other way is I figured out why my body was autoimmune in the first place, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Okay.
Cool, so type 1 diabetes, type 2 we spoke about, most of the cases. They used to call it adult onset diabetes, but guess what? They don't even call it that anymore because guess who's getting diabetes now? Children. So it's no longer adults only getting it. Children and adolescents are starting to get type 2 diabetes now than ever. So that just shows it's lifestyle driven. It's not an age dependent thing. So then we got LADA, I was talking about, which is called latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood. So what does that sound like? A late onset of type 1 diabetes.
Right.
Meaning, because there's some type 1 diabetics get diagnosed at a very young age. Say they're 5, 10, 15 years old. And I have a cousin that was diagnosed, I believe, almost at like 2 or 3 years old. I don't know how, but they found out it was at a very young age. So she's been on a pump, and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that we can share some information with her and she could change that aspect. But so this one is more of a late onset, which means that your body started to attack itself at a later time. But it's not being taught that way, but that's what's really going on, is something caused your body to go autoimmune at a later age, which caused your body to start attacking your pancreas.
Is that what happened to you?
It's what happened to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what happened to me too.
Yeah. So, and basically the symptoms mimic type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
So it's the same type of thing.
Before.
Yeah. Most people have not. But it's just a way of causing it. And sometimes it's called diabetes 1.5. Because it's not 1, it's not 2, so it's like right in the middle. So they call it diabetes 1.5. Then we have what's called MODY, which is maturity onset diabetes of the youth, which is actually a genetic disorder. So it's actually your genetic predisposition that you can potentially get type 1 diabetes. This one's less common, and the way you find that out is there's special genetic testing to see if you have the gene that could cause this. But very low percentage of this. Most people are type 1, 1.5, or 2. And again, mimics type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes, LADA and MODY, or LADA or MODY, are ones that usually require some type of insulin for their treatment. Where type 2 diabetes starts, this is crazy, starts with some type of medication like a metformin or whatever medication to help to process the sugar differently. But if it's not managed correctly, they don't take either the medication that the doses are supposed to, or their lifestyle doesn't change and their body breaks down more. Type 2 diabetics in the late stages end up needing insulin because now the insulin isn't even working on the sugar. So type 2 diabetics could end up needing insulin in the long run, but it's not because their body needs the insulin. It's because their body is still breaking down and the problem was never corrected in the first place.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what's been going on with the diabetic world, and it's kind of scary. So what is blood sugar? So we have to understand what blood sugar is in the first place. So everything that we eat gets broken down into some type of substance. carbohydrates, protein, and fats are macronutrients. Then you have minerals and stuff like that. But most of our glucose comes from the carbohydrates that we're having, and then a smaller amount from the protein that we're having. So, but it goes down to what's called glucose in the body. So when you get the blood test, they're checking glucose in the body. So it flows through the bloodstream, and insulin, like we said earlier, is something that helps to counteract the rise in the blood sugar. So this is what I was talking about with evaluation. So proper evaluation is important because people miss the pre-diabetic aspect of their analysis because of the way that they have their blood sugar evaluated, and also other aspects of their body. So this side right here is what's called the pathological lab values. This is what is used by your regular medical doctor that tests you, and they use what's called the pathological lab values. They figured out these lab values by getting a group of unhealthy people, finding out where they are on a range. It's usually a very broad range, and they say if you're on this range, you're sick. If you're not in this range, you're quote-unquote healthy. Now on the right side is what's called the functional lab values. These are the lab values that test for function. So pathological means a disease or a pathology. So the pathological lab value is looking at disease. The functional lab value is looking at function. Wouldn't you rather be compared to optimal function rather than disease? So in most laboratories, they use the pathological lab values, and you're going to see that there's a difference between them. So for instance, in glucose, the pathological lab values for glucose is 65 to 99. These are not that much different than the lab values for functional, but the functional lab values you should be between 85 to 100. Because believe it or not, having low blood sugar in the morning is an indication that you're going on a path towards diabetes, but they don't catch that. It's called reactive hypoglycemia, where your blood sugar goes up and down based on when you're eating and what you're eating. So sometimes if people get their blood sugar taken in the morning and it's low, meaning like 65, 70, etc., they might be waking up with low blood sugar because their blood sugar is fluctuating up and down like a roller coaster. So when they're not eating, it gets very low. When they eat, they usually choose something higher in carbohydrates, and it shoots up, and it's like a roller coaster. So depending on what's going on, and plus with those type of people, they typically tend to miss meals. So people that don't have a breakfast or don't have a dinner, and they go long hours without food, that blood sugar could slowly get, dropped to a low level. So and we're going to go over some of the differences between that. And then let's look at hemoglobin A1C. In the pathological lab values, they want you under 6. Well, in the functional lab values, we want you under 5. So if you're between 5 and 6, they look at it as fine. If you're between 5 and 6 in the functional world, you're going towards a level you don't want to be at. Cholesterol should be under 200 in pathological values. In functional values, we should be between 150 and 200. Because believe it or not, you should not have low cholesterol, because that's actually showing something wrong, usually with your digestive system. It could mean that you have leaky gut or you're not absorbing the food the way you're supposed to. So that's important to know. Where the function in the pathological world just says be under 200. But what if I'm at 120? To them, that's fine. To me, that's not good. So that's a difference in that. Triglycerides, HDL, and LDLs, also, they're called your lipid panel, all part of that. Triglycerides should be between 10 and 149. In the pathological, 75 to 100. So you can see the range that we have is a lot shorter. So when you have a shorter range, that means you're looking at more of a healthy individual. You want to be in that range. If you're on the outskirts of that, you're going towards disease, but you're not there yet. So can you see how if you use the functional lab values, you're actually going to catch things before they come, rather than waiting until it gets to the pathological level. When you're already at that level, a significant amount of damage has already been done to that organ. They say sometimes I think it's 30 to 60% of the organ has been destroyed. So that's a lot of damage before they even, get diagnosed. And that's why people wonder why, one day they could be quote unquote healthy and then they don't feel well and they go to the doctor and they find out they have stage 2 or stage 3 cancer. They weren't healthy and then got cancer a couple weeks later. They had this development over time that wasn't being caught because it wasn't properly being evaluated. Same thing with heart disease. People don't go from being healthy to a day later having a heart attack, but it happens a lot. But it's because they weren't properly managing the body and they weren't properly getting diagnosed. So diagnosis is huge, and you always want to diagnose yourself compared to healthy individuals rather than unhealthy individuals. So that's huge in the aspect of diagnosing yourself. So this is a quick thing about the diabetic cascade. I was talking a moment about what's called reactive hypoglycemia. So on the way, on the road towards type 2 diabetes, we have 3 steps. One is reactive hypoglycemia, which most people are not getting diagnosed with because the medical community is usually not worried about low and high fluctuations. They're more worried about a static high. So they don't get diagnosed with that. But those are usually the individuals, which I'm going to show in a minute, that to see if you're in that category, a lot of the people that are in that category are, number one, they tend to be very irritable if they're not eating very well, very often. Let's say they go a long period of time, they get very irritable. Why do you think they're getting very irritable? Because their sugar is so low. You ever got an experience where your sugar was low, like say you didn't eat for a while, the first thing that usually starts to occur, we start getting a little bit edgy. Things are starting to getting us angry a little bit quicker. We're not pleasant around people. And if you're somebody that's like that before you eat a meal, you're most likely very low in your blood sugar at that time period. And that's the first sign that you're going towards that diabetic cascade, but you're not there yet. So most people don't even think that could be a possibility that you're going towards that direction. And then that's obviously usually not treated or not addressed. So then they start eating like where they're going up and down. And then eventually that starts to go to a more insulin-driven cause to it. So reactive hypoglycemia. Let's just go over a little bit more facts about it. So there's a decline in their blood sugar within 2 to 5 hours after the meal. So they have the meal, within the next few hours it plummets down, usually because they have a higher carbohydrate type diet. There's a low blood sugar reaction after the meals, and usually caused by that all-American diet of number one. Sometimes we have a diet where we're not eating throughout the day. The number one meal that's missed in America is breakfast, one of the most important meals to have. There's a lot of people that go through their day, they don't have their first meal until it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they wonder why their blood sugar is kind of all over the place. Because if your body's not eating, it's going to store everything that it has. So you don't ever want to get like that. So it's going to it's not going to allow the body to function that it's the way it's supposed to. So it's the earliest stage of insulin resistance. The next step after that is called insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is when the insulin in our body is not responding the way it's supposed to with a blood sugar that's rising, because it's been rising for so long and then there's too much coming in at once. So the insulin becomes ineffective. And that's why the blood sugar slowly rises. And then they get them on a metformin or a drug that helps to lower that, because what that does is it increases the sensitivity of insulin to that glucose. So then they'll be able to use that glucose and get it out of the blood. But if it's not properly managed, that's why some people could change from using the metformin or that other type of drug that they might use, and then they have to switch to insulin, because it gets to the point where now the insulin just doesn't work anymore, even on that drug, and then they have to get the insulin in their body. Meanwhile, the big problem is that it's not being managed in the first place. They actually recommend, I believe it's about, I think they say it's about 60% of your diet should be carbohydrates, which is unheard of, especially in a diabetic world. In a diabetic world, you should be well under 10% of your diet as carbohydrates, and sometimes smaller.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the ketogenic diet, how it's a higher fat and protein, lower carbohydrate diet. But that is the diet that most diabetics should be on. I actually recommend most people on that diet to begin with, because carbohydrates are just driving inflammation and sickness and disease. So I would recommend that for most people, but especially for diabetic, because you don't want that carbohydrate intake to drive the blood sugar up.
Right.
So then insulin resistance, what we tend to see on a blood panel for somebody that is insulin resistant, this is important, is we typically see the blood lipid panel. So that's your triglycerides, LDLs, HDLs, and cholesterol. We typically see, in a pattern that you have insulin resistance, we typically see that cholesterol is going to be high, triglycerides are going to be high, LDLs, which is your bad cholesterol, is going to be high, and then your HDLs, which is your good cholesterol, is going to be low. When you see that pattern on your blood work, and you typically see your glucose level obviously being a little bit high, that's pretty much a pattern that you're either insulin resistant or going towards it, and you might even be diagnosed with diabetes. You start getting diagnosed with diabetes when you get closer to the 160, 180 to 200 level and higher. So before that, if you're at the lower level, then you're most likely insulin resistant and you're kind of knocking on the door of diabetes. So some signs and symptoms of reactive hypoglycemia versus insulin resistance. So reactive hypoglycemia, number one, they're typically going to crave sweets and salts. They're going to be irritable if a meal is missed or if they're not eating for a long time. They're going to be more caffeine dependent because they're going to use that caffeine to get them through the spikes throughout the day. They might get lightheaded or get a headache if they're missing meals because that blood sugar is plummeting. If fatigued, so if you're feeling really tired, you eat some food, you get really energetic, that's a sign that your blood sugar was low, you ate and it rose it up. So that could mean that your blood sugar was low, and that's reactive hypoglycemia. They might, between meals, when their blood sugar gets low, they might get shaky or feel like they're starting to sweat, or they may get the jitters because their blood sugar is getting low. Easily agitated or nervous, you don't want to have that blood sugar low, so that's going to cause that. And a hard time waking up in the morning, because they're waking up in the morning with very low blood sugar. So if you're having a hard time waking up in the morning, or even sleeping through the night, that's a sign that you might be in that category. Or on the other category, you might have fatigue after meals rather than energy because your blood sugar is high. When your blood sugar is high, you're kind of getting a little bit more lethargic. And I'm like my own case study here. I never really knew the symptoms of high and low until I got diabetes. Now I know. I can almost tell before even testing my blood if I'm high or low. And it's usually, higher is usually more of a lethargic, like kind of like you're just dragging, where a low blood sugar is more like you get like real shaky, you might get sweaty, stuff like that. You had a question?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Thanksgiving dinner where everybody overeats.
Yeah.
And you have the turkey. I know that's supposed to make you sleepy, but is that part of the same thing?
It depends on what they're eating during that meal, but if that meal is besides the turkey and tryptophan that's coming from that, if it's higher in carbohydrates, that could be a reason why. If you have a lot of high carbohydrate meal and you're exhausted afterward, it's a good sign that you might be going towards a higher blood sugar level.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of people try to say, like, don't have high carbohydrate meals if you're about to go to work or something like that, because that's going to have you bring up that blood sugar really high and it kind of makes you more lethargic. So fatigue after meal, especially if there's high carbohydrates. A craving more for sugar, because obviously you want more sugar because your body's craving that. So this one is craving sweets and salts. This one is craving sugar. Eating sweets doesn't decrease the cravings because your blood sugar is so high, it doesn't decrease that craving. Inability to lose weight. Obviously, if you're intaking a lot of carbohydrates, your body's not going to be able to lose as much weight because a lot of your body stores the sugars that it's dealing with. Frequent urination, that's a big sign of diabetes. Frequent urination, having to go to the bathroom a lot. One of the signs I also had before I got diagnosed is I was using the bathroom at least 2 to 3 times in the middle of the night, which to me was not normal in any way.
At your age.
Yeah, especially at my age. And the other sign that I had, now that we're talking about it, was, and this was shocking to me, blurry vision at night. That was another big thing. At night, I would have blurry vision. Like, I would be driving, and my wife would be like, what are you looking at? I'm like, I can't see what the hell I'm seeing. There were some times where I had to pull over, and she had to drive because my eyesight was so bad. Now, obviously, with my blood sugar under control, I see not perfectly at night, but I don't have the same problems that I had earlier. So my 3 biggest signs were I had extreme weight loss, blurry vision, and I did have increased thirst and increased using the bathroom, but shortly before I got diagnosed. But not always signs that people think about diabetes. So it's interesting how that worked out. So diagnosis. So reactive hypoglycemia, you're going to see your blood sugar lower than 85. And you're going to see your LDH, which is another thing that you could test. You're going to see that less than 140. That's going to be reactive hypoglycemia. So if you get a blood test and it's under 85, maybe in the 79, 75 range, you might be somebody that has a reactive hypoglycemia, which the medical world doesn't usually look at that. They don't look at low blood sugar unless it's very low, but not in the initial diagnosis. Insulin resistance, the early signs, you're going to see a greater than 100 glucose level. You're going to see elevated triglycerides. But then in insulin resistance, when you get into insulin resistance, you start to add in the hemoglobin A1C being high. You start to add in the cholesterol, HDLs, and LDLs being high, and then you have a decrease in the HDLs, which is your good cholesterols. And then true diabetes, when it starts getting fasting blood sugar of higher than 126, and your entire lipid panel is changed the same way as an insulin resistance. So that's the levels of how they diagnose. But the bigger picture is, why the heck is your body breaking down in the first place? So on my situation with type 1 diabetes, what I had to do to figure out why I was autoimmune, I had to do some very specialized testing. One of the things that could cause autoimmunity is what's called a leaky gut, meaning your stomach is not allowing the proteins and the abnormal bacteria and viruses to stay in your stomach. It actually leaks out the stomach, aka leaky gut. They also call it intestinal permeability, where it leaks out into the stomach, into the bloodstream, and then your body looks at that as a foreign substance and it starts to attack itself. So that was one thing that I had to figure out. So I tested myself for leaky gut syndrome, and I also tested to see if I was sensitive to the foods that I was eating. The most common sensitivity that causes leaky gut is gluten sensitivity, and then there's also dairy and soy could also do it. I tested the gluten sensitivity with the leaky gut. Crazy part about that, I went to my medical doctor. They tested me for gluten sensitivity. In the medical world, they look at gluten sensitivity as celiacs, which celiacs is a digestive disorder. You can be sensitive to gluten and it's not attacking your digestive system. So they tested me for gluten sensitivity. Guess what? I came back negative because I don't have celiacs. Mm-hmm. But there is about 40 other strands of gluten that you could be sensitive to, which they don't usually test. So I had to go to the specialized testing. When I got that 42 panel test, I was sensitive to 17 different glutens. One that attacked my skin, one that attacked, believe it or not, my brain, my cerebellum, one that attacked, obviously, some aspect of my pancreas. Yes?
You're talking about gluten sensitivity.
Sure.
Is this all found within wheat or other foods? I know that rye may have gluten.
Yeah, so gluten is a very broad thing. It's in a lot of different substances. Wheat and gluten are not the same thing, although they could be very similar in the sensitivity. So yeah, gluten is a protein that's in wheat and other oats and stuff like that 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 could be very sensitive to your body. It could cause a lot of inflammation in the stomach. It could cause a reaction, and depending on what part of the gluten you're sensitive to, or what strand you could call it, you're going to get different symptoms. Mm-hmm. It's ironic that I came back with one of my sensitivities being to skin things, and I've always had things with my skin going on. I never knew it was gluten sensitivity. I always had some, atopic dermatitis, they called it, where it was almost like bumpy stuff on my skin. I've had funguses before on my back, when I was younger, but I never realized it was gluten sensitivity. So that was one thing I figured out. So I found out that I had gluten sensitivity and that I had that leaky gut. So I had to change my diet, obviously, so I removed gluten, wheat, and soy, and dairy, and I just basically had that ketogenic style diet. But then I had to take supplements to repair my leaky gut, which those supplements we could go over in the future, because that's another hour conversation. Mm-hmm. But that's how I reversed the problem. So now I'm no longer, I am diabetic. Like if I don't have the insulin and I eat a lot of carbs, I will have an increase in my blood sugar, but I'm no longer out of control. And I'm not doing it with medication. I'm doing it with lifestyle changes and repairing certain things. So I also did tests to find out if I was sensitive to any chemical toxicity, because chemical toxicity could cause diabetes, or not diabetes, any autoimmune disorder. Luckily, I came back negative, but I did that testing. So I did the gluten testing, the leaky gut testing, the chemical sensitivity testing, and what's the other thing that I tested? Or was that it? I did so many tests. I spent like $1,000 worth of testing, where so many people are afraid to spend money for their health, where I was like, I'm finding out what's wrong with my body. And I don't care if it takes $500, I don't care if it takes $1,000, I don't care if it takes $2,000. But by spending that money, it got me to the root of the problem, and I was able to reverse a lot of things that occurred. So, yeah, diabetes is so misunderstood out in the world, and that's why the amount of people that are getting diagnosed is increasing at millions, and especially at a younger age, because it's not being taught to live a lifestyle where you have lower carbohydrates. Now, when I talk about carbohydrates, I don't talk about the good carbohydrates. You can have the good carbohydrates. You can have the vegetables. You can have those type of carbohydrates, It's the bad carbohydrates that most people have, like the breads, the pastas, the potato chips, the sweets, the processed foods. I mean, we could go on for hours of what half the people in the world have. But that is what's driving this epidemic. Do you have a question, or you're just fixing it?
No, I'm up on this. I mean, like,
I know you're
I'm
up on
having
this.
a good time here.
Yeah. So now how could you manage your blood sugar? That's a good thing to end with. So how I do it and how I would recommend it is, number one, you do not want to skip breakfast. But your breakfast should be very specific on what you're having. You should not have a breakfast in the morning that is high in carbohydrates. So you should have a breakfast in the morning that is higher in fat and protein. So you can have your eggs, you can have your bacon, you can have your sausage, you can have the things that people are afraid to have in the morning, but it's actually better for them, because what it's going to do, it's going to balance their blood sugar. Because if you start your day off with bagel, with butter, or with cereal, or all these things, what happens is it takes that blood sugar and it shoots it up like a roller coaster. And then 2 hours later, if you're lucky, it crashes down really low, and then you have to go and get that sugary, coffee or snack that's going to help to balance it out. So when you have high protein and fat, it will level out your blood sugar, so you're not having those fluctuations. So breakfast should be protein and fat mainly, and very low carbohydrate. That's number one thing. And then some of the things you could have the egg whites, you could have the turkey or chicken sausage, or even regular sausage. You could have the turkey bacon or regular bacon. Fresh sliced turkey in the morning. People don't think like meat in the morning, but it's not a bad thing. One of my favorite snacks I used to have in the morning, I used to take turkey, like, sliced up turkey or sliced up, chicken, and I used to take hummus, and I used to put the hummus inside of the turkey and roll it up, and I used to call it a hummus roll. But it's a great fat and protein that you can have. And I used to have that in the morning sometimes. Or now I do... avocados in the morning are great. So sometimes you could even have a nutritional shake. There's certain shakes out there that are good for you, that are multi-nutritional. You can add your good stuff to it. You can add your other things as well. But starting your day off with a breakfast is number one. You want to do that. Then you want to snack in between your meals. That's important. But you want to snack on good fats and proteins. You don't want to snack on your potato chips. You don't want to snack on your Snickers bar. You don't want to have coffee every time you are in between a meal. So that's something you want to do. So you might want to choose almonds, walnuts, hummus and vegetables, pistachios, whatever you want to choose. Those are all better for you as your choice of a snack. And then you want to start and end your day with protein. So you could have a small amount of carbohydrates in the day. I recommend putting it in the middle of the day, so that you're not having blood sugar spikes at night when you're trying to sleep, and you're not having a blood sugar spike in the morning when you're trying to wake up with energy. So if anything, put it in the afternoon. Now, I personally, in a ketogenic diet, try to have 50 grams or less a day, where that's a very low carbohydrate. Some people are having 50 grams per meal. So all of a sudden, by the end of the day, they're having 150 grams or 200 grams of carbohydrates, and they wonder why their blood sugar's off the charts.
I have to see what 50 grams of carbohydrates look like. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, so let's put it in calories. For every gram of carbohydrate you have, that is 4 calories. So if you take 50, you multiply it by 4, it's 200 calories a day. So imagine 200 calories. That's pretty low, right? Some people get 200 calories in their bagel. Well, not 200 calories, but maybe 50 calories in their bagel, or 40 calories. So so that's throughout the whole day. So figure you have to split that up. You're looking at every meal having about 15 to 20 grams of carbs per meal. Is probably a good thing. That's my goal. I try not to go any higher than 15, even my snacks. So I look at my snacks and I say, does this thing have? If it says anything above 15 grams, I always say.
Oh, on the label.
Yeah, on the label, I always say that's too high for me. I'm not going to do that. So, yeah. So okay, cool. So the top 5 things you want to do is you want to limit your carbs, your sugars, your sodas, your processed food. You want to eat mainly fruits and vegetables, lean meats, fish. Fish is amazing for you. It's got good omega-3s in it, etc. You want to exercise take omega-3 fish oils. That's amazing because I talked last week about the anti-inflammatory diet, or 2 weeks ago. Well, most of our body is chronically inflamed and we don't realize it. Omega-3 helps to decrease that. And I'll talk about different doses later. You should exercise about 20 to 30 minutes a day. That's another thing that helps to manage my blood sugar. When I work out, especially when I do cardiovascular exercise, it actually brings down my blood sugar. So it's another way a diabetic could manage their blood sugar, by exercising regularly. Even if they just did a half hour on the treadmill once a day, you know, that'll help to bring down that blood sugar. And they could do that without medication, obviously. And then obviously evaluate your blood sugar and lipid panel every 6 months to a year, especially if you have diabetes. So, I mean, I could go on for hours about this, as you figure. I went over time right now. I don't want to continue and take up a lot of your time. Any closing comments? Anything that you would like to know? Is there something I didn't touch on? Or, yes?
They link sleep apnea with diabetes also.
Okay. I haven't personally heard that before.
You should be tested for that.
Yeah.
That's the inability to sleep without losing breathing.
Like oxygen.
Most people lose breathing maybe about 7 times a night.
Okay.
Okay? But when you're up around 12 to 17 times a night,
That's a sleep
that's when you
apnea.
have it.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, diabetes is, they say, a precursor for a lot of things. Diabetes is a precursor for heart disease. Diabetes is a precursor for stroke, because it destroys your arterial lining when you have too much blood sugar. So, yeah, that could cause a lot of decrease in oxygen to the brain, to the heart, etc.
You mentioned earlier, and I think really this might be something that would be good for our Facebook audience to know. What are the choices of having the functional metabolic tests done, and where, if any, would you recommend them going to get these things done? Because there's a lot of people that probably would like to know that.
Yeah. So the only difference between a functional lab value evaluation and a pathological value evaluation is the doctor that's producing it.
Okay,
So they just would get a regular blood panel.
right.
They could go to their regular medical doctor, and they would go get a regular blood panel that's going to give them those pathological results.
Okay.
But what you do is you want to find somebody that does what's called functional medicine.
So more likely you would probably go to an ND with those particular.
If the ND does functional lab values.
Right.
Yes, the ND is a naturopathic doctor.
Naturopathic
Yeah.
doctor. Yeah.
So yeah, so there's different doctors out there. Which, if you want to search a doctor in your area, you're going to search a doctor that does. They might call it functional medicine, or they might call it functional
Yes.
evaluations.
So you really could find a doctor that's both in both worlds
Yeah.
and have that done.
Yeah, and we actually do that in our office. So they
Okay, good.
And that's something. Yeah, we do that here. So
Well,
I would be more than willing, if for anybody on Facebook or even here, if they wanted to send me their results, I could work with them and give them a functional evaluation. Even if their results were originally given by their medical doctor, we could find out if they're functionally at the level that they should be at, even if their doctor told them they're fine.
Okay, so in other words, you could have the test performed here.
Yeah, we could have it performed here. They could even get it performed in, if they live in Pennsylvania and they can't come here, they could have their lab values performed in Pennsylvania and emailed to me. And that's a way for me to help. So yeah, so the functional lab values are really important, because that's what's going to give a proper diagnosis. And once you have the proper diagnosis, then you can get the proper proper treatment plan.
If I understand correctly, if you have your blood test, it's basically a shifting of the different values, but the values are the values, correct?
Yeah, the values are the values. So, but the pathological lab values that I have are different than those.
Oh,
So
the
I
test-
have my own program that I put the same numbers that are on that thing in my program, except my program compares it to functional lab values. So it'll tell me if it's high or low functionally versus the pathological one. So it's just a different range. Every single number has a different range functionally.
Okay, so any of the other tests that you had spoke about, specifically the one in which you would want to test to see whether or not you have any of these gluten issues or metabolic issues, you could have that included with the test panels?
Yes, the problem is those tests are the only ones that are not covered by insurance.
So
So
you
the
pay for them
typical
out of
metabolic
pocket?
blood panel, that most doctors do, that will be covered by insurance. But when you start getting into the specialized world, hence why I had to pay $1,000, they're not covered by insurance. So
Okay.
that one test that I did that tested my gluten sensitivity and leaky gut, That, I mean, it wasn't a large amount, but it was a $150 test.
All right. So do you have a place where those particular types
Yeah.
of labs
We
you could
do that
recommend?
here. We do that here, or you can find the lab. There's two great labs. One lab is called Cyrex Labs.
Mm-hmm.
So you could call them and find out if there's any doctors that use them.
Okay.
Cyrex Labs is CYREX.
All right.
And then the other company that I use, which is a more locally based to this, is called Vibrant Wellness.
Okay.
And it's a more localized company that they are the ones that are a little bit more affordable. So that's why some patients like to use them. But in addition to testing for the gluten sensitivity and the leaky gut, they also test for food sensitivities. So they test 92 foods, the most common foods that are sensitive. That test is $199. So still not large amounts of money.
Right.
But I use Cyrex Labs for certain ones, and I use the Vibrant Wellness for other ones.
So, all right. So a person could come here and then have
All
those exams or those panels done here, and would not necessarily have to go to another physician to have those done.
They would not have to.
Okay. Now, one other question: if the person doesn't have the option of going to their medical place to have the tests done, could they come directly here to the chiropractic source to have those tests done, or could you recommend, or would you recommend a lab to do that?
I would. They could, if they're local, they could come here.
Okay.
We don't do the blood testing in here. We would
Right.
have to order it and get sent out. Although if we use Vibrant Wellness, we could get a phlebotomist that comes here and they could do that.
Okay.
But if they're not local, what we could do is get them an evaluation by a local doctor, even if they don't have one. Just get an evaluation. I could tell them what to test, get a local evaluation, and then just get those results and send them to us
Okay.
So I could go to my regular doctor
to get the evaluation. The issue about that is they might not order the same panel that we have.
Oh,
I order a
here.
very comprehensive panel.
I
So
see.
since you're local to here, I would recommend just doing it with us. We
Yeah.
still could put it through your insurance, though.
Understand. But so like a place like Laport, you could have a panel done and you could go there and have
Yeah.
it done?
Although I would use that Vibrant Wellness. I already have a customized panel that I've made. They will cover your insurance for the
Right.
regular panel.
Right.
And I would use that one only because I have a specialized test, and the phlebotomist would come here. You don't have to go anywhere.
Oh, already so.
And then they would take the blood test, and they would analyze it and get you the results within the next 7 days or 10
Yeah,
days.
I would like to see myself
going on?
personally.
Awesome.
I'd like to have that test done because for actually the Veterans Administration, I mean, I have my blood panels done there.
Mhm.
But yeah, that would be something I would be open to
Cool.
since we suffer from the same thing.
Of course,
you know
of
what
course,
I mean?
of course.
So
Yes.
yeah, that would be something very
Awesome.
interesting.
Any
for me.
comments or questions on Facebook? Nothing? Okay. I want to respect the time,
Okay.
and we'll wrap this up. If there's any questions, obviously you can reach out, and have a go on Facebook.